On this episode of MythBusters,
Oh, nice.
Adam and Jamie have a data with destiny.
I am totally psyched about numbers.
They're testing the myth that during an underwater explosion,
Boom.
lying prone on the surface will increase your chances of survival.
Whoa, look how high that went.
Then,
Cue the gong.
Cary, Grant, and Tori tackle an ancient armor saga.
Ooh, I felt that one.
Is the far-fetched theory that paper armor
Well, you couldn't find me a giant pair of scissors to run with?
protects as well as steel,
Well, that is one dangerous-looking machine.
fact, or pulp fiction? Who are the MythBusters? Adam Savage
Come on, let's go. Here comes chaos.
and Jamie Heineman.
Relax. This one hurt a bit.
Between them, more than 30 years of special effects experience. Joining them, Carrie Byron,
This should be fun.
Tori Belleci,
We survived.
and Grant Imahara.
Start the car.
They don't just tell the myths, they put them to the test.
Check this out. Navy divers who find themselves in the water when an explosion, like a depth charge or something, is supposed to go off underwater, are instructed specifically that the safest position for them to be in the case of an underwater explosion, is flat on their back on the surface. And that's significantly safer even than treading water in an upright position.
That's interesting. You wouldn't think there'd be any difference at all.
You wouldn't, and that's why I think it's something that we should test.
I'm up for it.
Navy SEALs and walruses are advised that if in danger of a depth charge disaster, their best chance of survival is to float on the surface rather than treading water or diving down. But would it really make a difference? Adam, Jamie, and the bomb squad are primed to find out.
Ultimately, of course, I foresee a large-scale quarry lake, big explosions, very cool high-speed shots. But where do we begin?
Well, let's say we start with some underwater shockwave testing here in the shop and see if we can collect some data, see if there are any problems, see if there's anything to the myth.
Sure, this shouldn't be that hard.
Okay. We're going to need three things: a tank full of water, an explosion, and a means of measuring the shockwave.
It sounds deceptively simple, but setting off and measuring underwater explosions in the shop is anything but simple.
What are you thinking?
I'm thinking this requires a brainstorming sequence
About a long, narrow tube, only
with an inevitable tense discussion,
It would fail catastrophically.
obligatory technical jargon,
15 psi,
equidistant from the sensors,
blast pressure.
7 psi.
That could work.
and after a final audio crossfade or two,
And we create our shock gun, so I'm just going to draw it. Then we got sensors.
there's a resolute conclusion signaling a solution.
I think that seems like a plan.
I think so.
Let's go build it.
And the plan they intend to build will look like this.
This here is our tank. 15 feet tall, it's gonna hold 1,300 pounds of water. Inside that tank, we will place 4 shock sensors. I will detonate a pistol dead center in the tank. That pistol will generate a shockwave that will travel up and down through the tank. If depth plays no role in the propagation of a shockwave underwater, we should see an identical reading between sensors B and C because they are each the same distance from the source of the shockwave. If depth does play a significant factor in the force of a shockwave underwater, then we should see a difference in the force measured by these two sensors, and that's where this story gets really interesting.
But it gets interesting before that, because Jamie has an ingenious plan of a tank.
We're going to need a very tall, narrow tank for this test. Now, we built one of these before for firing bullets into water, but let's just say there was a serious problem with that one.
Water is heavy, and keeping it contained is a tricky task. Last time out, despite using some heavy-duty acrylic and iron girders, things got messy and dangerous.
Oh, criminy.
Now, with that in mind, I've come up with an entirely new way of building a tank that we've never tried before. It uses very thick vinyl. Well, that ought to do it.
Ought to, but they won't know until their thickened, flexible tank is fully erect
You're up.
and full of water.
Another 6 inches.
It's in! In a few minutes, we're about to fill that tube with 1,300 pounds of water. Will it hold?
I can't detect any leaks.
I hope so.
So does Jamie, because nothing scares the Heinemann more than a mess in potentia.
It's terrifying. Quit yanking on it.
With the tank holding, they're about to tempt fate by introducing the explosive ingredient.
The role of our shock producer in the small-scale test will be played by this, a .357 Magnum pistol, to which I'm going to make some modifications so we can fire it remotely and underwater.
Okay, Carrie, what do you got for us?
I've got a historical myth, and I love this one. Now, in ancient times, even up to the 1800s, some armies in China actually made armor out of paper.
Paper armor, that is cool. I mean, paper's the last thing you would think of to make armor. I like this one.
And the cool thing is that paper was supposed to perform as well as steel.
Wait a minute. Paper armor performing as well as steel armor? I'd like to see that.
That's why I want to test it.
Throughout history, material science has been at the cutting edge of advancements in armor. But is it really possible that the ancient Chinese manufactured paper armor capable of performing as well as its contemporary steel equivalent? To find out, Carrie, Grant, and Tori are arming themselves with the facts and then the armor.
Well, first up, I'd like to do some research, talk to an expert, find out how the paper armor was possibly made and what the steel counterpart would be.
Yeah, I mean, when we think of steel armor, we think of medieval armor like this, but Chinese steel armor of the period may not have been like this at all.
So it sounds like we're gonna need to get some steel armor of the period and make ourselves some paper armor. Then we'll run them through some tests and see how the paper compares to the steel.
I'm looking forward to this. For a paper armor myth, I've come up to the Napa Valley so that I can talk to Greg Martin. You live in a museum.
These are all my toys.
Now, he's an antique arms and armor expert. Hopefully you'll have a little insight for me.
And his first interesting insight is that the existence of paper armor is no myth at all.
Historically, paper armor is traced back to the Tang Dynasty, 600 BC. And of course, the Chinese were very big developers of paper. So it would stand to reason that paper armor would develop there.
So how would paper armor likely have been constructed?
By using what we call lamelleur. Paper was laminated together into squares and then attached piece by piece, and then would cover the entire body.
What was steel armor like at that period?
Steel armor would have been the same way, most likely, layered, but again, it would be plates attached together to make a full covering, rather than one whole suit.
So, lamellar paper armor really was used in ancient China. There are records of multiple manufacturing methods and designs, but the myth is that it was as effective as the steel armor of its day. An outrageous claim, and the team is skeptical, but there is some cause for hope.
Now, when you hear paper armor, it seems totally absurd. But it's actually based on the same scientific principle as Kevlar. Kevlar is a fine mesh of fibers that actually slows a projectile down by spreading its load and stretching the fibers to bring the projectile to a halt. Now, paper is the same concept. It's a flexible, layered construction.
Now, we know from historical sources that they used a mulberry paper. Look at this, you can see the fibers. This is strong stuff. What they would do is they would stack layers of it together, and that was enough to stop arrows. Now, one source told us that they would take these layers of paper and laminate it with resin or some kind of shellac or even glue. Another source says that they would cover it with a cotton cloth and sew around the edges. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take all those techniques, find out which works best. Once we have that, then we'll be able to put that up against steel and see which one does better.
And to test our armor pieces, we're going to use this. Ow. This is a sharpened tip on the end of a pneumatic cylinder. Here we have a chunk of ballistics material. We put each sample underneath, and then we fire the cylinder like this, and see how each sample performs as a result of the puncture. And the best one will go on to make our final armor pieces.
This is folded paper with cotton.
So, the goal is to compare the range of historically accurate manufacturing methods.
One.
Wow, look at that.
Wow.
It actually stopped it.
and decide which will give the steel the best run for its money.
This is rabbit skin glue on paper.
Each paper piece, regardless of its construction method, is 1/2 inch thick, a dimension discovered in the research.
Lacquer made it more brittle and it actually went all the way through.
And although shellac, an organic resin, may double up as an effective weapon,
That actually stuck!
the result that emerges is that hardened squares like lacquer lack the penetrative protection of the winning sample.
Okay, and folded paper.
Oh my God, look at how well that worked.
This absolutely works the best. Simplicity.
Dude, it looks like the paper just moves out of the way and absorbs all the energy.
Now that we've found our winning paper construction, which is simply folded up paper, it's time to put it up against steel. So we are going to be putting both of these materials against common weapons of the time. We're going to be doing blunt force, some kind of a club or a mace, a sword, and then finally an arrow. Let's see which one performs the best.
Our trio of Mythbusters have a martial mystery from Oriental history. Supposedly, as a material for making armor, paper matches steel.
So the concept behind paper armor is lamellar construction, which is many small plates laced together in rows. Now, the plates could have been composed of cloth, metal, or in our case, paper. The advantage of this armor was that it was incredibly flexible. The paper armor was also lightweight, cheap, and purportedly as effective as steel. And it was used all the way up until the 19th century.
So far, the team has discovered that of all the historically recorded manufacturing techniques, simple folded squares provide the most protection.
This absolutely works the best.
But they're still skeptical of paper's ability to match steel. So before they go all out and build a full suit of paper armor, paper will have to prove itself in a authentic setting.
Greetings, friends. Though this looks like an entirely authentic Tang Dynasty household, it is in fact the best reproduction we could come up with for under $10. Cue the gong.
And here's how this proof of concept will work. Paper will go up against steel in a series of weapons tests. And if the damage to a clay block beneath is reasonably comparable, only then will they move on to a full-scale testing with full suits of armor.
Now, the way we're choosing our thickness of armor is we've done some research, and the lamellar armor was about 1/32 of an inch steel. As far as the paper armor goes, we found out that it was about a 1/2 inch thick, and a 1/2 inch thick equals about 28 sheets of the paper.
To get things rolling, Grant wheels out a familiar robotic swinger. Calibrated to human swinging speeds, that's 125 miles per hour for the data divas out there. She's ready for weapon number 1.
So for our blunt force trauma test, we're gonna use this. This is a reproduction of an ancient Chinese weapon called a chui. That's gonna do some damage, isn't it?
Hopefully.
First up, for a taste of the mace, is the steel control. The material the mythical paper armor has to match.
Trauma test in 3, 2, 1.
Wow, that did really well.
Yep, the clay indentation is slight and shallow. But now for the all-important comparison.
All right, let's see how paper armor can do.
Okay, this is the trauma test. Oh, that did not look good.
That looks like it would hurt.
And a look at the side-by-side impressions only enforces the impression that this myth belongs in the waste paper bin.
I'd rather be wearing steel at this point.
Right.
I think the steel wins in this situation.
Yeah.
But there are 2 more chances to find out if paper cuts it as armor.
I just cut my eyebrow.
First, the sword.
Well, that is one dangerous-looking machine.
And just for reference, let's first see what the sword does to the unprotected clay.
Ouch.
All right.
Okay.
So it looks like it went in about an inch.
Now for the cold, hard steel.
In 3, 2, 1.
All right, you see here, the sword hit the steel armor and it put a dent in the clay, but it didn't actually cut through wounding the person. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna switch out the steel armor for the paper armor and see what kind of damage it does on the clay. Wow.
The result is astonishing. The damage is minimal. It's similar to the steel and a vast improvement on the inch-deep slice experienced by the unprotected clay.
It only cut like maybe 2 or 3 layers.
That is crazy. Paper for armor?
I know.
It could work.
I'm impressed.
It's looking great.
Which brings us to the third and final weapons test, the arrow. And first to face the firing squad is the steel.
Oh, it bounced back.
Awesome. Let's see how far it went in. That's it.
That's it.
That is less than 1/4 of an inch.
So paper has one final chance to prove its metal against the metal.
In 3, 2, 1.
And hold on to your skeptic's hat, because despite the arrow's penetration into the paper, the clay beneath survived better than it did against the steel.
Wow. Look at that. Oh, I think the arrow went deeper on the steel armor.
Yep, it's concept proven. The paper more or less matched the metal. And this myth can move on.
When I first heard this myth, I thought paper, armor, that seems ridiculous, but it is actually doing very well. I'm excited though to see the next step where we actually build a suit of armor out of paper and see how that performs.
To best avoid injury from an underwater depth charge, would it really make a difference lying supine on the surface? Intent on investigating, Adam and Jamie will set off an underwater shockwave and measure it at various depths.
All right, this is my finished shockwave-producing remote-firing pistol. It will fire only blank rounds because I have put a little shockwave disperser in so that it disperses the shockwave both exactly up and exactly down. I've mounted it to the end of a boat hook so that I can adjust its height. I put a blank round in it, cock it, and then from above the water, I can fire it, generating the shockwave we need for our instrumentation.
To measure the shockwave from the handgun blank is the final item on Jamie's list. 4 pressure sensors held in place by magnets.
Here we go.
Hey, it worked!
Equidistant from the central explosion, the 2 pairs of sensors will give the team readings in pounds per square inch.
Okay, you should be good.
So what's the water tube going to tell us after this test? Are we going to get a much higher blast pressure here than here? It's an interesting question because the pressure here is already at 4.2 pounds per square inch. Up here, it's only 2 pounds per square inch, and that's just from the weight of the water. It feels like a bank heist. So that, combined with the explosion, I think is going to inherently give us a higher blast pressure down there. But will that equate to death while treading water, while lying flat on your back? I don't think so.
We know the greater the distance you are away from an explosion, the more the shock wave from that explosion is going to have a chance to dissipate, and therefore the safer you'll be.
Okay, we're hot.
The question we're trying to answer here is whether there's some feature to do with depth underwater and the associated pressures. The greater the depth, the more intense the shock wave.
That is perfect.
The shallower the depth, the less intense the shock wave and the safer you'll be. What do I think? I don't think there's going to be much of a difference.
So, both Mythbusters are skeptical, but science is an evidence-based discipline.
This is depth charge disaster. Small scale test. Hopefully not making me too wet. In 3, 2, 1.
Nice.
Well, the sensors did register a result, and the tank didn't spring a leak, but a close look reveals the numbers aren't ideal.
So what'd we get?
Well, it's looking awfully noisy, but we're getting some interesting numbers. Unfortunately, the close proximity of the walls of the tank to the explosion is affecting those pressure waves and creating noise, which is obscuring the measurements that we're looking for.
That noise, the reflected shock waves bouncing around in the narrow tank,
Is it still noisy?
means the peak pressure wave for each individual sensor is difficult to determine.
Let's run it again.
But 3 bangs later, and they have enough data points for a pattern to emerge.
That's working beautifully. All right, kids, put down your juice boxes and pay attention. It's time for the moment you've been waiting for. It's time to interpret the numbers. Remember that if there was anything to this story at all, If depth did play a factor in increasing the force of a shock wave, we should see that the deeper sensors would give us a higher reading than the shallower sensors at the same distance. And that is what we're seeing. In every one of our tests, the sensor 3 readings are higher than the sensor 2 readings. Sensor 4 readings are higher than the sensor 1 readings. That tells me at least that in small scale, there might just be something to this story.
So paper armor has potential.
I think it might be time for us to go full scale.
Let's make armor out of paper and put it up against steel in a series of challenges.
I love it. We'll put each of the armor on and then run through a series of tests. Maybe we'll test speed, agility, and endurance.
And we'll have to have some kind of ultimate battle between the two suits. Not wearing them, of course.
Pick a number.
So, cue the full-scale monumental mission
You're a dork.
to make a full suit of paper armor.
Only 850 to go.
And the less taxing task of having a real steel one delivered.
So to put our paper armor to the test, we're going to pit it against a metal suit of armor from the same period. Now, because this is hard to make, we ordered it from a modern armory company in the Ukraine, and it's battle ready. Who wants some? I also do parties.
Meanwhile, Tori gets busy pulling the paper armor design together. A design based on these ancient drawings and Grant's period-accurate steel replica.
Now, if you look at the steel armor, the scales have holes drilled into them and they're tied together with leather straps. Plus, they are overlapping. That way there are no gaps in the armor. I think we need to do the exact same thing. Take our paper scales, drill some holes into them, overlap them, and tie them together with cotton cord. All right, so this is the progress that I've done so far. As you can tell, I got just enough to protect the important stuff, but looks like I have a long way to go before I'm completely protected by my paper armor.
Producing this season's hot new paper armor is a huge job. So the MythBusters sweatshop is open for business. And after a week's hard work, hundreds of lamellar plates have been sewn together to form a full suit of armor that, after some minor tailoring, will be ready to go into battle.
Oh, Carrie, I just don't know about this paper motif. I don't know if the judges are really going to like it or not. Oh well, make it work.
The question is, will it work as well as steel? To find out, the team is signing up for basic battle training.
Handcuff!
But before both sets of armor are weapons tested, there are 3 track and field events.
Now, so far in our testing, the paper and the steel are pretty much neck and neck. But now that we have our full suits of armor made, it's time to put them to the test. We're gonna put our suits head to head in the types of things that you would find in battle, namely speed, agility, and endurance.
Oh, I'm back. So why are we testing these 3 things, endurance, speed, and agility? You're gonna need endurance because you're gonna have to march to the battle. You're gonna need speed because you're gonna be running into the fight. And finally, when you're in the fight, you're gonna be ducking, dodging weapons, swinging weapons, and you need that flexibility. So, turns out, stopping weapons isn't the only thing that the armor needs to be good at.
And the first event in the Armor Olympics is the 50-yard sprint with sword.
Well, you couldn't find me a giant pair of scissors to run with?
Well, you will be wearing a suit of armor, this season's must-have safety gear.
Here on MythBusters, we are making science cool.
So I'm about to take my speed run in the paper armor.
All right, this is sprinting in paper armor. Are you ready?
And I have to say, I do think that the paper armor is gonna encumber me a little bit just because I've got the armor right down here where my legs are.
Here we go. On your mark, get set.
We'll see how I do.
So 8 seconds is the benchmark. And although the paper is undoubtedly bulkier, the steel is twice as heavy. Meanwhile, Tori, looking for revenge for past transgressions, fails to dent Grant's defenses.
Call that a kick? Let's do this.
Now, to make sure that Grant is testing these armors fairly, we're gonna let him rest in between tests, so that way he has full energy for each of the runs. Kind of reminds me of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
As the saying goes, never bring a sword to a starting gunfight.
On your marks, get set!
I can say I'm really surprised at how little a difference there is between the paper and the steel armor. I can't believe there's only a second difference.
Yep, the bulkier, more restrictive paper armor performed fractionally better. But with so little in it, conclusions can't be drawn just yet. Cue test 2.
Now for the endurance part of this test, I will be running a mile through these hills and then ending up on that side of the moat, at which point I will try to jump up onto the rope and cross over.
So that's the course.
Yes! Go!
Now for the time trial in paper.
I don't know if I'm gonna have the energy to fight when I get there.
With the armor weighing in at close to 30 pounds, it's tough going.
Now, the running wasn't so bad in the paper armor. I mean, it is awkward. You have all this bulk on you. I am Tor, part of the paper clan. But climbing over the rope, I get too old for this. I thought I had it, but about midway there, my legs fell off the rope. And once I lost my legs...
You pull yourself back up?
Do it! I knew that was it. I was going in. It's fresh!
Bleep indeed, because paper and water don't necessarily mix. But luckily, it has a chance to dry out overnight. Whether it'll retain its structural integrity for the test to come is another matter. And speaking of tests to come, Tori's time to beat tomorrow while wearing steel is just short of 12 minutes.
You guys don't heat this pod?
Let's get home and get you dry.
All right.
We live this way.
This way.
So where do we stand?
Well, our data's a little noisy, but it does seem to be supporting the central tenet of this myth, which is that depth does seem to be a factor in increasing shockwave strength.
Yeah, but the data's just too noisy. I don't trust it. I think we need to go full scale.
To a quarry lake?
Could be.
Done!
Oh, look at you. Aren't you Mr. Television?
Come on, let's get to work. Behind me is one of our favorite experimental locations, man-made Quarry Lake Pit 232 in Ione, California. Editors, can you take our audience on a little tour of other things we've done in this lake? Primary thing you need to know for this experiment is that there is nothing living in this lake. The pH is just a little bit off, and there are no fish to kill with all the explosives we will be setting off in there. Isn't that great? Shall we go out and set these points?
Yeah.
Away we go.
While Adam and Jamie lay out some positional anchors and buoys, let's find out how their TNT party is gonna go off.
To test this story, we're going to set up a series of explosions 15 feet underwater and measure them with sensors placed at different depths nearby.
I claim this shore in the name of MythBusters and science in general.
Now, for all this to be accurate, we need to be able to locate the explosives and the sensors in a precise orientation to each other.
Oh! Oh!
What'd you let it go for?
I didn't realize it would pull so hard.
To pull that off, we're going to use a variety of ropes and anchors.
All right. That's our sensor array buoy.
The sensor array with its PCB sensors at 5 different depths will be positioned at 3 distances from the site of the explosion. And that spread of 15 data points is designed to answer the question, how best to survive a depth charge disaster. And with the lake rigged with all the relevant anchors and buoys, the bomb boys arrive.
Now, whenever we use explosives, we bring in the professionals. Retired FBI Special Agent Frank Doyle and the Calaveras County Bomb Squad.
Sporting a look available at www.shadesanduniforms.bomb, these are the guys that will make sure all 3 big booms happen safely. Meanwhile, Adam, with his sensitive mast, is focusing on data acquisition.
This is my sensor mast. These 5 devices are my sensors. In a few minutes, I'm going to join them all together and put them in the water to make the largest piece of data gathering scientific equipment we have yet built and used in the history of the show.
That's no exaggeration. Attached to a floating rig will be 5 high-tech pressure transducers at 5 different depths, all linked to a central command center.
Let's talk about the constants and variables in this experiment. As far as the constants go, we're always going to be using TNT. We're going to be using 10 pounds, which is 5 of these things, and they're going to be hanging at 15 feet below the surface of the water where the explosion will occur. Boom! Also a constant are the sensors. They're going to be placed at 5 different depths, both above and below water, and they'll be the same for every blast.
I feel safer already.
As far as variables, there's only one, and that's the distance of the sensor array from the explosion. Now we're going to start at 150 feet away and move progressively closer, recording the readings that we get off the sensors at each stage.
Hey, look at that's working beautifully. All right. How are we going to use our sensors to represent a body lying flat on its back versus a body treading water? Here's what we're thinking.
We determined that the torso of a person lying flat on their back on the surface has an average depth of about 6 inches. We also determined that the torso of a person treading water has an average depth of about 2 feet. Why the torso? Well, because that's where the air pockets are. That's where our sensors are going.
Yep, it's a gruesome but important detail. Injuries from underwater explosions are primarily caused when shock waves pass through internal air cavities, such as the lungs and intestines. Hence the focus on the depth of the torso.
10 pounds of underwater fun.
Well, everything's prepped.
Yep, nothing left but an explosion.
Unfortunately, you're going to have to wait for that explosion for these commercial messages and perhaps some other MythBusters.
Tori is rested, ready, and looking not so hot.
You know what? This thing will protect me from arrows and getting dates.
Come on, Tori, you can do it!
Go!
The question is, how will Tori's time in steel compare to the 12-minute paper run? And will he even survive?
Now, there's actually a little jeopardy to this test because, first of all, the run is going to be really hard. It's going to be slow. That thing is heavy.
This sucks big time.
But climbing this rope over this water, he's wearing 60 pounds of steel. He goes into the drink, that's 6 feet deep.
Adding extra.
Oh, look at the leg.
There's no way you're making it across that road.
I don't think I'm gonna make it.
Fortunately, Tori doesn't risk drowning because after the run, he just hasn't got the energy to get across.
Somebody stick a spear in me. I'm done. Steel armor for the endurance test makes it very, very difficult. You got 60 pounds of extra weight, and this thing is not very conducive for running. So I live to fight another day. Unless I die of a heart attack. Then I don't. Then I'm just dead.
The weight of the steel was the killer. Tori took an additional 5 minutes to complete the run and then couldn't climb the rope. So an army traveling any kind of distance on foot would be at a distinct disadvantage in the heavier steel, which means paper wins that round. For the final event in the Armor Olympics, agility, courtesy of some time-bending editing, Quarry will simultaneously tackle the assault course in steel and paper. After drying out overnight, the paper doesn't appear to have suffered any damage, but it's still just as awkward.
It's definitely not as heavy as the steel armor. Not a lot of give here.
So will it be the bulky and restrictive paper that prevents peak performance? Or will the additional 25 pounds of steel weigh her down?
That can't be good for you.
Okay, here we go. In 3, 2, 1.
Go, go, go! Pick up those feet! Pick up those feet!
On the first obstacle, the paper already has an advantage.
Wow!
The weight difference is clearly the key factor. Halfway into the course, and paper-clad Quarry has already opened up a big lead.
Come on, Byron!
Go, 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 go!
And while crawling, the paper may well be slowing Quarry down.
Uh-oh, she's having a little trouble with the sand pit.
But the steel almost brings her to a halt.
The paper's in the way!
Which pretty much sums it up for the rest of the agility course. The paper may be awkward, but the weight of the steel seals the deal.
You look like an armadillo.
That's right. It's built for protection, not speed.
Good work.
So with the first 3 events in the Armor Olympics complete, the conclusion is clear. Paper is outperforming steel.
But now is the real test, the battle test. We're going to use weapons from the period and see if it can still stand up to metal.
Welcome back. Let me walk you through our setup. Out there in the middle of the lake, tied to a buoy, we've got 10 pounds of explosives floating 15 feet below the surface.
Oh, it does nicely.
Great.
150 feet away from our explosives, we have our sensor mast with 5 sensors that detect shock waves mounted to it. 1 above the water and 4 below at the following depths. 1 at 6 inches below the water. This simulates someone lying flat on their back at the surface of the water. 1 2 feet under the water. This simulates our person who is treading water. 1 15 feet below the surface at the exact level of the explosives, and 1 deeper than the explosives, mounted all the way down 25 feet below the water surface. Each explosion will cause movement in the sensors, which will be translated into electrical energy, which will be sent as data through these wires. That data will find its final resting place here in the equipment manned by David Harding, who will crunch our numbers. After 3 blasts, we'll end up with 15 data points and hopefully the answer to our question. Now, normally, we would do something like set off a blast, look at the data, set off another blast, look at the data, etc., etc.
I think we're good to go, huh?
In this case, we're not going to do that. We're going to set off all 3 of our blasts in as short a period of time as possible. We're doing this for 2 reasons. 1, so that the condition the explosions happen under is really, really similar. That makes our data much more consistent. Second reason is the numbers we're going to be looking at might be quite subtle, and only by correlating across all 3 blasts are we going to be sure that we're telling a proper story.
Here we go for data acquisition stage 1, or the first big boom of the day.
150 feet in 3, 2, 1. Oh, yeah.
Wow! That was a hell of a thud. Felt that. That blast was really unexpectedly cool. It had 3 distinct kind of whoops to it, like a whoop, whoop, whoop. Very cool.
An opinion only heightened by the high speed.
Oh, look at that. That is just lovely. I'm always astonished by how fast a shockwave moves.
Yeah, it's done and gone before you actually see anything happen.
You think that this is all the explosion, and actually that's way after. That's the aftermath. Blast 1 went off perfectly, and David says we got good data from all the sensors. We are going to withhold looking at them for now. We're going to go right into Blast 2 from 70 feet.
Okay, that ought to do it.
Yep, we're all set up to get the next set of data from a blast 70 feet from the sensors.
Firing in 3, 2, 1.
Whoa! Whoa, look how high that went. Wow.
All right, well, let's go look at the high speed. So what actually happens during an underwater explosion?
Oh my gosh.
Well, the explosion creates a rapidly expanding gas bubble that pushes water in front of it, and that creates a pressure wave. And it's that pressure wave that we're looking at because that is what could potentially hurt a human.
But the question is, does that hurt potential and your very survival depend on a difference in depth?
This is truly awesome.
It's pretty.
To answer that, the race is on for numbers and the third and final data point.
David says we got good data from the first 2 blasts. Shall we prep for the last one?
Great, I'll set it up.
All right.
As incredible as it sounds, paper armor is holding up against its contemporary steel equivalent. But the team has yet to put paper in front of the firing squad.
Good work. So now that both steel and paper armor have passed through the agility tests, it is time to see how well they protect under a full-scale attack. What we're gonna do is set up some mannequins. Grim up, this is gonna get dangerous. Cover those mannequins with both armors and then attack them on a full scale with swords, arrows, and even an ancient gun. Then we'll be able to find out once and for all, is paper armor as good as steel armor?
But perhaps paper's biggest test will come not from our trio of weapon-wielding barbarians, but a second soaking, this time from the heavens. Or more accurately, the condensation of atmospheric water vapor.
It would have been nice to do this experiment on a nicer day. And again, war doesn't wait for good weather.
The rain may indeed weaken the paper and favor the steel, but it's a real-world problem. If paper is to prove itself as protective armor, it'll have to cope with a light shower.
We're all set. Now we're gonna start with the arrow test and just throw a barrage of arrows at them. Remember the watcha? Watcha! I'm gonna watcha them. So watcha this.
And so the barrage begins. Carrie, Tori, and Grant let loose from 20 feet at both sets of armor. And despite being soaked, softened, and sodden, the paper protects our male model mannequins as well as the steel does.
Totally worked.
That is phenomenal.
It totally worked. The paper armor is stopping the arrows. We have not got one arrow to penetrate through. I mean, it doesn't look as good as the steel armor, but the important thing is, it's working.
Next up, the sword test. Slicing, dicing, jabbing, stabbing. I'm just gonna go and try to maim those guys.
All right, Gary, just swing wildly.
Using both an edge slicing stroke and a stabbing action,
Oh, I felt that one.
Carrie finds the dial marked crazy and turns it up to 11.
I'll tell you one thing. It's interesting the sound you make when you're attacking. I didn't actually mean to verbalize all the
Working out some issues there?
I'm gonna get myself a stabbing mannequin for home, because it's a really good way to work out aggression.
And speaking of aggression, where does that leave the mannequins and the myth?
It looks like it's separating through, but it's stopping before it even gets halfway through the tile.
That's great.
Wow.
Yes, the paper armor is working. On any individual stab, slice, or arrow shot, a previously undamaged scale clearly matches the metal. But Tori sees a key armor attribute where steel trumps paper.
Now, right now, the paper armor is stopping the sword attacks, just like the steel armor. However, after multiple attacks, the paper armor starts to break down. It's looking like the steel armor is a lot more durable.
Next weapon.
And this is where we surely draw the line on paper, because gunpowder has just been invented.
Okay, Greg, so for our experiment, we need a firearm that would have been of the era of the paper armor. What do you have here?
Well, a paper armor was used up to the 19th century. Let's try something from the 18th century, which is this French flintlock pistol from about 1750. Okay, let's do it.
And first up facing the flintlock is the metal,
Whoa.
Nice shot.
followed by its fibrous friend.
Here we go. In 3, 2, 1.
Now, to assess the results.
Ouch, did it go through? It didn't go through.
Hey!
The paper armor stopped
It stopped
the bullet. And it looks like the steel stopped the bullet as well. Both these armors are effective against this weapon.
With paper once again in the same league as steel, this myth requires a further fast forward in time.
So now we're gonna try our 19th century gun, the Colt 45, 1,200 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. This should put our paper armor to the test.
This is 19th century gun versus steel and paper armor. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1.
And neither stood a chance.
Well, it's obvious it punctured the steel, and it looks like it went through the paper as well.
With both sets of armor succumbing to the souped-up firepower, it's time to conclude this ancient Chinese conundrum.
Okay, paper armor performed the same as steel with every test we've done, and it failed in the same place as well.
Yeah, it just seems that the guns got too powerful for the armor.
I've really been wanting to do this story for a long time because it seems so outlandish, but it's super impressive. Paper armor is actually a viable option in warfare.
Viable, but there is one notable drawback.
As you can see, it doesn't have the same durability as the steel, but it still works. So this one is plausible.
Plausible.
Plausible it is.
Unbelievable.
Welcome back. Jamie and I have been spending this episode exploring the idea that if you're in the water during an underwater explosion, you are far safer lying flat on your back at the surface than you are even treading water. We've done some small-scale experiments.
Nice.
We've done some large-scale blasts in this here Quarry Lake.
Yeah.
Not yet looked at our data. We have one more data point to get, one more blast, and then we're going to look and see if it actually correlates to what this myth purports to say.
This test has our explosive 30 feet away from the sensors. And frankly, that concerns me because I think we might lose our sensors.
So without further delay, let's get that final set of numbers and find out how sensitive the sensors are.
Okay, 30 feet. Are you good to go?
I'm good to go. Let's do it.
In 3, 2, 1.
Whoa!
That was lovely.
Wasn't it?
Like a flower. Those of you keeping score, 10 pounds of explosives, 15 feet under the water, 130 feet from where you're standing on land, feels exactly like an earthquake.
Well, it all comes down to this. David's crunching our last set of numbers,
I am totally psyched about numbers.
and that's the final piece of the puzzle that we need to answer our question.
Remember, the question is, during an underwater explosion, does it really make a difference lying on your back compared to treading water? The answer is in the numbers and the units.
We're measuring our blast pressures in terms of pounds per square inch, or PSI. But that by itself doesn't tell us what we need to know as far as how dangerous it is. For that, we need to know PSI over time. That's the data that David is going to be feeding us. And the unit he'll be using is PSI milliseconds.
And the threshold number to keep in mind is...
What our research has uncovered is that people exposed to a pressure of 87 psi or higher have a greater than 50% chance of dying. That's our threshold then. Anything below 87 psi milliseconds is alive, anything above it equals dead.
And hot off the portable printer, the figures make for a pair of happy MythBusters. Remember, Jamie smiles on the inside.
Dude! Check that out! Nicely done!
Doesn't get any clearer than that.
It totally does not.
I have to admit, we have rarely gotten data this lovely. We had 5 sensors, 3 blasts for 15 separate data points, and this whole story comes down to 2 data points. The sensor we had at 6 inches versus the sensor we had at 2 feet for the blast from 30 feet away. That blast would have killed you if you were treading water, and you would have lived through it if you were lying flat on your back. That's the story we came to tell, and that's the story the data tells. It's lovely.
It's a definitive set of data, all right. But to really put this myth to bed, Jamie reads it a story called Why.
All this data is great, but what it doesn't tell us is why. Now, I did a bunch of digging around, and this is what I found. Energy doesn't like to transition from one material to another if they're different. The more different they are, the more it doesn't like it. So in the case of an explosion underwater, as that pressure wave travels towards the surface, it bounces off because it can't pass through it. And what it does is it transitions from a pressure wave to a tensile wave. And therefore it's able to neutralize a lot of the energy, especially in that surface zone, and that's why it's safer there.
So, soldiers in the military are told that in the case of an underwater explosion, they are far safer if they are lying on the surface of the water flat on their back than if they're treading water. What is our answer to that?
That's exactly what we found. They got it right. It's confirmed.
Totally confirmed. Let's go. I'll tell you, even though that last blast would have been survivable if I was lying on the surface, I wouldn't want to try it.
Yeah, that was like being in an earthquake.